Hi, hello, welcome to my voice narrated wrap up because I didn't feel like putting on a face and an outfit. I wanted to wrap up all the books that I read in November, December, and January. I have 3 months of things to talk about. Some of these I've already talked about in some of my videos, so feel free to skip through. I will do them in the order that I read them, and we will start with the books that I read in November. OMG, let's start with a really good one. This is a 4.5-star read for me. It is Such Great Heights, The Complete Cultural History of the Indie Rock Explosion by DeVille. And this is by a music reporter journalist from Stereogum. I thought this was such a fun and enlightening look at indie music. Each chapter is divided into a different kind of little spotlight of the genre. So there's chapters on indie rock, there's chapters on indie pop, indie rap, and there's always a playlist at the beginning of each chapter, which I really enjoyed. It put me right in the moment of what I needed to be thinking about. This music, indie music in general, was really integral to my adolescence. I think kids and people who grew up in like the 2000s and 2010s would really like this. I really enjoyed how the author questions even the idea of what is indie. Really, indie has become a misnomer. It used to mean independent music, and it no longer really means independent music. It's like what we think of when we think of independent music. What does that music sound like? And now we use that as a way to describe music. Indie was in the underground, and then it wasn't, and this is a book all about that, about how it became normal mainstream music. Definitely, if you're a music head, you would like this. I have slightly less positive things to say about our next read, which is Heart the Lover by Lily King, a book I was really anticipating. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I love her characters and I love her writing still. I think her stories are really wistful, they're full of longing, and she's always considering the many ways that our lives can go. And I think the first couple of parts in particular, I just couldn't stop thinking about these characters because they are so real. That is how Lily King writes. Do you think that they're going to get back together? Do you think it's going to work out for them? Like, what is going on with them and being so like enraptured in their world? The way that this book like finished off, I viewed as a literary plot device that I didn't really like. It was kind of a hard sell for me as like, this is a finality in their relationship, and that is like what's causing them to come back together to talk it out. And I just thought that it was pulling on my heartstrings a little bit too much. I really liked how it wasn't really talked to us about it being connected to writers and lovers until I saw that like offhand Casey written in a paragraph in like a little part. I was like, ding ding ding, like, is this writers and lovers connected? I just wish that the ending was different. That's all. Let's Go Coco is a graphic novel for kids, and it's a really cute story about friendship and basketball, standing up for yourself through how life is changing. And I really like the art here. It reminded me of like Hyperbole and a Half or like Bob's Burgers animation, and the way that like the characters blubber and cry I thought was hilarious. Definitely was for me. I really liked how basketball was the focus in this book. It was super Midwest of it to do that. While I enjoyed the plot, I did think that it needed a little bit more to drive home the importance and the emotion in the story. Sweet, cute, but it didn't like go to that next level. I gave it 3 stars. Ooh, a book that I haven't talked very much about on my channel is Unmask Alice, LSD, Satanic Panic, and the Imposter Behind the World's Most Notorious Diaries by Rick Emerson. This ended up being a 3.5-star read for me, and I'll explain why. I thought that it was really intriguing and entertaining. I think that writing about something like this is like such a niche little thing that is such an interesting story to take on. It is looking into Beatrice Sparks, who is the person who wrote Go Ask Alice and Jay's Journal, which was published under Anonymous. And it really took over the YA fiction scene in the 1970s and really is one of the books that is so important to the genre and to the like age group to write for teens. And it talks about how important this book was, but it talks about how much this book was basically a fraud. So these books were initially responding to basically 70s and 80s culture that was happening in America, like the war on drugs and the satanic panic of the 1980s. So we kind of hear the context of why these books kind of came to fruition. It talks about Beatrice Sparks' personal life as well. The one thing about this book I will say is that so while the author is very passionate, I did think that he was really sarcastic and holier than thou in how he writes. He does have research to back up his information, but I do feel the serious disdain that is coming through in his voice. Like, this guy hates Beatrice Sparks' guts for sure. Maybe the writing style could have been a little bit different and it would have landed better for me. Up next was The Carpool Detectives, a true story of 4 moms, 2 bodies, and 1 mysterious cold case by Chuck Hogan. This was really engaging, especially seeing how 4 women connected with the human aspects of a case, a cold case that they all decided that they were going to try to solve. I really valued that they sincerely cared about the families involved and were really dogged sleuths. The author, I think, also gives us really good insight into the women's personal lives, into why they're interested in this case. And this book is a pretty good argument for having hobbies and having work outside of being a stay-at-home parent, especially during the first year of COVID lockdown. The downsides to this book are that it's kind of repetitive and that financial crimes generally, when it comes to true crime, are kind of tedious to follow, and this one is no different than that. I would say that disappointingly, this crime is not solved because while the sleuths have a really good final narrative that convinces the police, nobody has been charged with this crime and nobody has gone to prison for this crime. I kind of wish that was different, but I mean, it's real life. The other thing is that you have to take everything that the author writes at face value because a lot of the names are changed as pseudonyms in this book to protect the identities of the women. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Winging It was a really nice return to form for this duo of creators who I've enjoyed their work Allergic but didn't love Squished. This one was really special. Winging It is what I was looking for. It's kind-hearted, a great grandmother and granddaughter relationship as well. There's new neighborhood kids that everybody's like starting to develop friendships with. I really also enjoyed how much like nature journaling took part in this. It reminded me of like being a kid and scrapbooking. And I also really enjoyed selfishly all of the DMV representation here, seeing the Smithsonian museums, seeing her walking around the Capitol, and seeing the change of seasons that happen here in Virginia. I like that as well. I rated Winging It 4 stars, but I rated my next book, The Scammer by Tiffany D. Jackson, 2 stars. I think I've decided after reading Grown in this book that I enjoy Tiffany D. Jackson's ideas. The 2 that I've read have been inspired by like real headlines. For example, Grown spins the R. Kelly case and The Scammer spins the Sarah Lawrence college cult case. I'm really drawn also to the social themes and questions that she poses. Also, same as Winging It, in this book, it takes place in the Washington, D.C. area, so that was also interesting to see as well. Ultimately, I think Jackson is really much more concerned with making a fast-paced, psychologically twisty thriller, more so than she is focused on the characters and the plots. I don't mind if a book is twisty, but I want it to make sense, and I don't think that the stuff that happens in here, especially like the cult stuff, like information doesn't sink enough. Not enough time is given for it to sink before the next thing happens that levels up the cult even more. There are also kind of some superfluous things that happen in here related to romantic relationships, and there is an unreliable narrator reveal, like big bad villain at the end as well. The next book I was really anticipating, and it is ENSHITTIFICATION, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It by Cory Doctorow. I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars. While like the cover is funny looking, I didn't think that this book was going to be funny. It's really snarky and lighthearted the way that the author writes about this topic, so I didn't really expect that. Many of the examples and viewpoints here are well thought out. I did think that it was smart and insightful and made me think of things in different ways, especially thinking about the history of the internet. While all of that is true, I do think that a lot of the points are circular and that could kind of be repetitive via audiobook. It also is trying to be like a practical thing and down to earth, but a lot of it too is more like higher level thinking, abstract thinking, and policy wonkness that sometimes is more focused on systems and companies and not as focused on how this affects regular everyday people. And I kind of wish that it focused on the human aspect a little bit more. He is cynical like me, but I think that I am more cynical than him when it comes to my belief that this can be something that we fix in the future. I mean, here's to hoping. I hope that the internet gets better. Time to talk about The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. While it's true that every Holly Jackson book I've picked up after A Good Girl's Guide to Murder has not lived up to that first book, I still feel like I want to pick up her books, and I don't know why. Ultimately, I think that this was kind of a chore to finish because it was really weirdly paced. It was fast at points, which is kind of what you expect from this kind of a book. But then there'd be parts that would be really a slog and felt bloated. It's a really long book, and some parts of it do feel unnecessary. I was really confused about whether if I should or shouldn't like the main character. The twists were really convoluted at the end. It was a lot happening where you had to really suspend all belief. And I thought that the documentary stuff was going to take more of a part in this story. And that was one of the reasons why I picked it up. So, yeah. She also struggles with writing love interests, in my opinion, and the writing ended up being way too dramatic. And this came through very much so in the audiobook. In Racebook, Onyebuchi looks into the history of the internet by looking into specific topics that relate to how he found the internet. This book does have very niche elements to it, so while it was really intellectually stimulating and I think that it's written well, that there are things in here like video game talk, which I'm not super versed in. I wish that this book was a little bit more feelings focused, because often when I read memoirs in which I'm not very well versed in the topics, it doesn't really matter so long as I connect to what the author is going through or sifting through. But I feel like if this focused a little bit more on emotions that the author was thinking about related to his history with the internet, it would have landed a little bit better for me. Okay, deep cuts. I was really looking forward to reading an adult fiction book to end off the year, and this was the one I chose. It had a lot of good reviews generally, and I thought that it was a serviceable and enjoyable story. I loved that there was such a music focus. I also really loved being taken back to the 2000s where this book is set, and there is a big part of it where it's about being in college and early adulthood. I really enjoyed that aspect of it too. Ultimately, I wish that this book was more a coming of age of the main female character, Percy, and less of a love story between Percy and Jo that is very much a will they or won't they over many, many years, and they keep circling back to each other. I didn't quite 100% believe the dynamic of them being like meant to be, and I do think that this is going to be a better movie than it was a book. We already have Saoirse Ronan and Austin Butler attached, and I think that they will sell Percy and Jo better than the book did, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. If you were watching my videos last year, you should know that I really enjoyed Mahogany L. Browne's Chlorine Sky. It's a book in verse that I really loved, and this one is also a book in verse, but I didn't jive with it as much. Part of it, I think, is that I was not ready for a fictional COVID story. Turns out that no, I'm not ready for it. It also had multiple points of views, which is different than Chlorine Sky, and there are some characters where their points of view stood out way more, like, for example, Malachi or Samira in this book. I also just think that this book is a little bit too on the nose for me. It's a little bit heavy-handed. It doesn't have pointed enough things to say in an organic way, and I just wish that that would have come across better. I ended off 2025 reading this beautiful, stunning book, and a book that made me cry. I really love this book because I think that the author, Jeffers, has accomplished something super incredible by mixing essay memoirs, which, you know, I loved in 2025, but she also focuses on political and historical analysis. She includes poetry as well as some of her writings. I found it to be so vulnerable and raw. It warmed my heart, but it also broke my heart. It's really smart and critical and analytical. I just loved hearing her beliefs. She's in her 60s now, so she's lived a full life, and she talks about her religious beliefs. She talks about what she thinks about marriage as a divorced woman. She talks about her family, and she has a really tough upbringing. Abuse happened in her life as well. She has a complicated relationship with both her mother and her father, and also her beliefs about why she is a womanist. I loved hearing her memories, and I loved hearing how her memories affect how she views the world. She really contemplates in this work what it's like to be a Black woman in America, and honestly, I just loved being in her brain. It made me want to read more by her just because her writing is so beautiful and poetic. I just thought it was so stunning, and it was one of the best reads that I read in 2025, and I so highly recommend this book, especially if you love essay memoirs and kind of more short nonfiction. Next, I read this really engaging but super complicated and scattered memoir, understandably so, about grieving a friend and a colleague. Crosley, her friend passed away from suicide, and she also looks into other things that are semi-related, like there's a robbery that happened in her apartment, which is like she's lost things, just like she's lost her friend. She talks about the start of COVID in New York City, and she talks about her and her friends' work in the publishing and literary world through the decades. They've been in the game for a bit. And it was really interesting to hear about publishing houses and how that all works. In particular, Crosley's friend worked in like the 50 Shades of Grey situation, which I remember taking over the world. I'm super curious to hear what the partner of her friend thinks about her writing this book. Is there a need for this memoir? And while I learned a lot and I was invested, I still felt like we were at arm's length for a lot of parts in telling of this story. I have definitely made my thoughts known about reporters writing full-length books and how sometimes that does not work out. And I think that Miracle Children by Katie Benner and Erica L. Green kind of meets that. These are two reporters for the New York Times who focused on this story about an unaccredited school in Louisiana trying to basically get kids to college. The couple in charge of the school honestly started falsifying and faking documents to get kids into colleges, and it became the scandal that was uncovered. I thought this was a worthy story, obviously, but I thought that the organization and the storytelling and the writing really wasn't all the way there. It just didn't have a flow and a narrative that is important for a nonfiction book. I learned a lot about Louisiana in the specific community, and I also learned a lot about what colleges are looking for and how college admissions are really a big part of this problem. I didn't feel as invested in these families as I feel like I should have been, considering how interesting their stories were. Whew, I have a lot of thoughts about this book. I don't think that I disliked it as much as other people upon reading reviews on Goodreads, and I don't think that Oliver doesn't have good points about working in a public library system. She only worked in public libraries for 9 months, but has a lot of thoughts. I agree with her that I didn't go into libraries thinking that I was going to be calling the cops and the paramedics, and that there'd be medical emergencies and outbursts and fights and mental health crises. And you know what? I do think that she's right. It is a symptom of our larger societal problems that we have, having less psychological help for people, that there's more income inequality, there's less housing security. But I do think that this book is very, very negative about public libraries, and I think that it would have been more fair to also write about the good stories. She talks about the families that came to her library as a children's librarian, and I just wish we got to hear those stories, because while there are bad things about working in a public library, I also really love working in a public library because I love the families that come and visit and what you mean to them in their early literacy development, and I think that that is a focus that she lacks in this book. In particular, because by the end of this book, she turns it and does try to become more positive, and it just comes across really disingenuous coming from her that we can save libraries after she's literally spent the whole book just like shitting on libraries. So, I do think it's important, if you are thinking of going into libraries, to learn over time to let things go before you go home. And that is something that is really difficult at first, that I feel I've gotten much better at. I literally might tell a story about what happened in my day, but I don't let it fester in my brain in the way that it did for Oliver. I think part of the reason why this happened to her is because she kind of has a complex about saving people that come to the library, in the same way she sort of had a complex about saving kids when she worked in the school system. I am cynical about libraries often. You can't imagine the things that I have seen, and yet I still have fun working at the library, and I'm sad that this wasn't her experience, and maybe that's why I've been in libraries for almost 10 years now, and she only lasted 9 months. Sorry about her experience. Piglet by Lottie Hazell did take me a little bit to finish it up. I was really engaged in the beginning. I especially loved the friend and family dynamics. There's also really interesting ways that food was being depicted, both deliciously and kind of reviling. I enjoy reading books about unlikable characters and characters who like self-sabotage and are not good or nice to themselves, but I couldn't really get in the headspace of the main character and understand her motivations. I didn't really feel like I understood where things were going and how it was going to wrap up, and like the why of what was happening to Piglet. I also thought that the end would be more strong and pronounced, and we'd get a little bit more of a sense of what she felt about the wedding, marriage, and being with this man, and also what's going on with her friendship dynamics changing, and also what's going on with her parents and like looking back into her family history. I just thought that this was going to pack a little bit more of a punch than it ended up packing. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I made a video last year about 2024 releases that I missed out on and I wanted to read in 2025. And I meant to do the same kind of video for 2025 releases that I wanted to catch up on in 2026. And this book, Marriage at Sea by Sophie Elmhirst, was going to be one of those books on that list because it ended up being on so many best of year end lists. And I don't understand why. This is a 2-star read for me, and I really think there is no intensity or emotion in the writing. This is about a shipwreck, and it's a survival story. They were literally stuck in sea for like many, many, many days. I still don't feel like I understand the two people that we are focused on in here. Who is Maurice? Who is Marilyn? What is their love story? They really don't have characterization to them. I don't really understand like them as people. I don't think that this book is about love. No. I don't think that this book is about obsession. I don't think so. I think this would have even been fascinating if it did lean on what happened to them after they were found and that like newfound weird annoying fame that got attached to them as they were kind of forced to do this like media freak show where they were going on lots of TV shows and things like that. I just think that this book was really superficial, honestly. I don't really understand why the author wrote about it. The author didn't ever interview these people. All that this author knew was what she read from their personal accounts and like the newspaper clippings about it. So it just felt like, why did this happen? I also do totally agree with people who have said that some parts of this is literally like listing supplies and food items. Like, why? There's like not enough meat and substance to the story. Okay, let's talk about a lovely book now. This is Stone Fruit by Lilai. This was really pensive. It was really pretty and beautiful. And I think it's for people who enjoy slow moving plots, more about what's happening underneath the surface for these specific characters. It's a story about family, both blood family and found chosen family. It's about romantic love, and it's about gender and identity and accepting yourself. I thought that the illustrations were soft. I love the color palette. I thought that it relayed the emotions that the characters were going through very well. And I really enjoyed the scenes with the child and the couple that were like playing with the child, and how like feral and weird and wild they are, because that's like how kids play. And I really enjoyed those scenes. I think that the only downside to the art style for me is that I didn't quite know the ages of the adult characters. They both felt like young adults and like middle-aged people at the same time from the way that they were illustrated. And that's literally my only qualm about this book. Another book with kind of a similar color palette is Kirby's Lessons for Falling in Love by Laura Gao. This is the author and illustrator of Messy Roots, which I read, and I had some issues with it, but I definitely wanted to read and see something else by this author illustrator. I think that, very similar to Messy Roots, the emotional impact is successful in the story, but same as Messy Roots, there's too many topics that we are trying to sift through and navigate in this story to make it come across well structurally in a story. I feel like you have to lean on a few plots and really focus on those plot lines. Here, there's like 5 or 7 plot lines. When you do that, it's hard to really drive home your point. And I also think some of the art here is hard to decipher. There are some important like plot points and developments where like the scene changes, and I had issues where a few times I couldn't follow what character it was that we were talking about, and I would have to go back a few panels to understand what was happening. So I like the characters, I like the overall message of the story. I just wish that I liked the storytelling better. I think generally I have a complicated relationship when it comes to women writing about gay male love stories. But I had to get in on this heated rivalry situation just because everybody was talking about it. Like all of my podcasts were talking about it, and I just didn't know what they were talking about. I actually watched the show first, and I think that that was the right way to do it. I think that the actors in the show and their micro expressions are really what sells the romance about the show. And reading the book afterward, it was like I was just adding on to how good the actors made it on the show. So much of it is also like the dialogue is pulled word for word from the show, so it's like revisiting the show in my mind by reading this book. So I like that as well. I will say, like, ultimately, I think that Heated Rivalry, the series, is probably too much sex for my preference. I had this whole conversation with a friend of mine of the kind of like spiciness that I like in my romance books, and this is like too far for me. And I do think that the actors and the showrunner sells it better in the show than this book does when it comes to the sex scenes, because it is so tied to like how much I feel like they're yearning in the show. Somebody just delivered something. Sam, it's okay. Thanks for protecting us. This book did make me consider picking up more romances that take place over a long period of time, like this romance does, because I haven't really read a romance that had that long yearning, and I really quite like that. I also like the humor and the character struggles and personalities. I ended up reading this one 3.5 stars, and overall, it was well done. Last book! This is How to Say Goodbye in Cuban, or Decir Adios en Cubano, by Daniel Millares. I did read it in Spanish, the whole thing in Spanish, which is one of my goals for 2026. And this ended up being a really beautiful book about escaping Cuba as it's changing. The family in this book end up escaping to South Florida. And in this book, you see kind of how the revolution changes everything in Cuba. You see the relationships that the neighborhood kids have with each other who are on different sides of the struggle. And I really enjoyed the grandfather in this story as well. I think the way that the parents try to hide the heavier things that are happening, and they say like, this is just for adults to speak about or to talk about, is such a universal kid experience. It's something that just felt like, oh, that happened to me growing up as well. Because children are really observant and they're really smart and they can tell what's happening in their environment. And Carlos's questions in this story are really real. His father doesn't want to answer what is happening, so he keeps him in the dark, basically. This turns into kind of like an escape survival story towards the end, and it is very frightening. It is adventurous. It's something that I think kids would really like to read about, especially kids who love book series like I Survived. I think that this is in line with that. I enjoyed the author's note at the end, and it gave like a whole new perspective of what the story was about, because I thought it was about the author's actual life. But no, like the main character that we're following in the story is inspired by his dad's experience moving to the United States from Cuba during the revolution. I really enjoyed the art. I really enjoyed the coloring, especially like the cheeks and the way that they are like red from being out in the sun and playing outside. I really had a good time reading this in Spanish, and I didn't think that it detracted from my experience. So really the way to go for Spanish reading for me right now is reading kids' books, for sure. And that is the end. That is the end. How many books did I end up talking about? Like a lot. Hopefully I do my February and March wrap-ups not in this kind of a chunk. But I hope you enjoyed watching this video and listening to my thoughts. If you are interested in reading any of these books, please let me know down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye!